Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda Carney. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And this week I'm really pleased to have an old friend joining again, someone I haven't caught up with for a while. I've got Ruth Cornish here from Amelore, and Ruth's got a really extensive background, which I felt that in terms of the Chief People Officer career journey, it would be fascinating to catch up. But let's always start at where you are now. So Ruth, hi, please do introduce yourself and just explain a little bit about the role in terms of how you carry it out currently.
Hi there. So I'm Ruth Cornish and I'm an independent Chief People Officer. So I have a business that I founded in 2010 and we provide a slither of expertise or a sliver of service to different smaller businesses. So I have a small team. I have senior HR consultants beneath me that are sort of HR director level, and then consultants beneath that. And I have a direct relationship with the CEO and the management team and help them sort of define their strategy. Some of that we might support, or they might have their own internal HR director and we'll get involved in a sort of coaching, mentoring relationship. So it's slightly different for all the clients.
And I mean, obviously, because you are independent, you get to go across a range of different types of client, which must be quite interesting. It must give you opportunity to, I guess, share expertise, learn from different areas. Do you find that you niche at all by doing this in terms of, do you specialize in any particular industries?
It's interesting because when I started out, my background was sort of financial services, professional services, and I'd done some time in the public sector. And then I almost immediately, the first client, the big client I started working with, was not on the highstreet.com, which everyone listening will know. And through that, I started working with Monica Vinander, which others will know. And that gave me a sort of retail portfolio. And I started to work with L'Occitane, Charles Chewit. Brands attract brands. These days, what would I say our niches are? Fintech, property, airports seems to be something that we look after a couple of airports, and now other airports want us to look after them. So it's quite interesting. And I would say being independent and looking after lots of different businesses, the great thing about that is that you can add value and spot things in a way that you wouldn't if you were just internal in one industry, in one organization, because you start to get to only see what's around you, whereas I'm in and out of things all the time. So I think that's one of the things people value.
So it almost gives you that greater breadth of perspectives that you can bring from one to another. Before I go back and say to how you came on the journey, I'm just curious about, do you think that, you know, it is natural for people to stay in industry? So you said you went from one brand to another and it was all quite similar brands, and you might go from one financial services firm to another. Do you think culturally that there are similarities most of the time, or do you think it makes no difference?
Between different industries?
Well, actually, or within an industry, as in, is it beneficial to select somebody from that industry because they get the culture, or actually is it just comfort?
I actually think the biggest mistakes that people make, it's where we've helped actually by helping people hire, where they say, I can't find an HR director with property experience. And it's like, but you don't need them to have property experience. You need them to be fit to your organization. So actually they might have different experiences. So I absolutely think that's a mistake that people make. I mean, I didn't know anything about retail. Now I know a lot, but I always knew about HR. And you can pick it up really quickly by asking the right questions. But the things that we know about, culture, development, legislation, strategic frameworks, etc., are very transferable. So I think that is definitely something. And I think where people stay in industry, actually you see people all the time saying, well, I don't know like what I do anymore. All you need to do is change sector, I think, sometimes. And there's some sectors that you can retail, actually, all of that said, can be quite a difficult sector to work in. If you've worked in that, you can pretty much work anywhere. So it's just what you're all about, I think.
So actually having a fresh outlook. I mean, I think sometimes in public sector, sometimes they will actually really appreciate somebody coming in from private sector, and I dare say vice versa. You bring that fresh perspective, and also cultures differ, don't they? I mean, I was thinking financial services. We work with a few financial services providers, and actually the culture within each of those organisations is really, really different. So I mean, it does make sense what you say, but I was curious as to whether it felt that way as you've done those sort of loops. So I've kind of got two angles though. Before I go on to the strategic bit, because I think it is interesting, and people listening, the purpose of these episodes is to help inspire people how they could, you know, go on to their career journey up to being a CPO. And I think you being this term fractional CPO, which I'd only heard of about 6 months ago, it's obviously been around forever, but it passed me by. But you being able to take these different roles, I feel like that must have take an extra level of confidence. But before I go to that, can you tell us a little bit about your journey? Because you have got quite a varied journey, and how you got into HR as well in the first place.
Okay, so I began my career temping at American Express many, many years ago, and I was in sales. Does it show? And so I was looking after all the key account relationships, and that was what I was taught, how to look after sort of high profile organizations and understand profit and loss before I ever got into HR. And then that was in Brighton, and then I failed a driving test, so I couldn't go out selling on the road, and I had the choice to redo it or just to leave and move up to London. So I left to move up to London and got a temp job working for a firm of chartered accountants in HR. So I fell into HR. I didn't even know it really existed. My only experience of HR had been up to that point when I applied when I was at American Express. I was a clerical person. I applied for a 5-grade promotion. And when I went to HR, they went, no, you can't do that. You've got to apply for the next level. You can't do it. And I thought, oh, okay, that's the department that says no. So I just applied straight to the sales director and said, do you remember me? We were chatting last week. I'm really interested in this area sales manager job. And he went, yeah, I'll give you an interview. And not only did he give me an interview, he gave me the job.
Wow.
And so my experience of HR was busting their processes. And it was, why can't I do the job if I can do the job? Why does your process say that you've got to be promoted? And so it was kind of an unusual thing. So I guess I went into it perhaps a bit sort of sassy, if you like. And then I worked in professional services, did the IPM qualification as it was then. Now it's a CIPD. I'm surprised you still got the personnel word there, but anyway.
I was just thinking about personnel. You must have been personnel to start with, right?
It was Institute of Personnel Management.
Management.
Yeah, Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. Probably it should be People and Development, but that's something for the CIPD to decide. And stayed in professional services, then went to investment banking, and then went to public sector. And something that I perhaps did earlier in my career was when I worked for a firm of accountants, I was seconded out of HR into internal audit. So I'm a trained internal auditor. And we do provide that service to a large firm of accountants. That gives you a very different look on how an organization's run, in terms of governance, internal controls, risk management, the risk register and all of that. So that was quite an interesting thing. And then through that, I set up their first HR consultancy. And that was Mazars. And we now work with Mazars all these years later, providing their HR consultancy. So I think I've always been entrepreneurial and wanted to make money rather than sort of sitting in a department, making decisions. And wanted different experiences. The public sector was very interesting, but it wasn't the right sort of environment for me per se. I couldn't cope with the lack of commerciality. And I think
you're too much of a rule breaker as well.
Well, I did, yeah. I think I made quite an impact. I think they'd have a lot of people on capability procedures. I think I had about 400 when I went into the region, and when I left, I had 2. We just cleared them all down. So it was kind of, the unions hated me, loved me. That you definitely knew you had me. It was a great experience, I think, and some good people in the public sector. But it does need to modernise. I would say that.
Let me just pin in on that. I mean, that in itself is quite an interesting. You just dropped the comment that you went in and they had lots of people, which is really true. You do have lots of, we work with public sector clients often, lots of grievances and lots of processes, and it's hard work for everybody. So you went in and there were 400 people on various procedures and you got it down to 2. How did you do that?
By personally getting very involved and being brave and coming up with solutions. And I give you an example of one guy that was on capability, and he'd had an accident and he'd had a head injury, and that had affected him. But he'd come back to work, been signed as fit to come back to work, but his behaviour was different from before. And we were putting him through a capability process where we were trying to prove to him that he wasn't who he was, and clearly he wasn't. And actually that one, he was eligible for ill health retirement, but no one had even asked the question. So he could leave with dignity. So it's just people get stuck in a process and they don't so I would attend all the meetings. I was here, there and everywhere. And I think the public sector is just used to things taking ages and slow. And, I think people had 5 years to go through that performance management cycle. It's too long.
Yeah.
So it was talking to the union.
Painful and time wasting for everybody, right? It's not beneficial for anyone really in that scenario.
Exactly right. So the main thing is to get the unions on side so they can understand how this is helpful. And a lot of people put on capability because the managers didn't know how to manage them. So there's lots of stuff around training, and understanding in the public sector, there are really clear career paths. But also there's an expectation that everybody can get to the White House and not everybody can. And sometimes there were sort of assessment centres and promotional boards where people were promoted because it's the 10th time they tried, but then immediately they were failing and they were put on capability, whereas that's only one way of dealing with it. So it was kind of understanding. It was fascinating at first. I loved it until I sorted it all out, and then I needed to move on.
Go and do something fresh. Fascinating. So sorry, that was a slight. I wanted to delve in there a little bit. So where did you go from there?
From the Environment Agency, that I set up my own business because I got to a point, I was early 40s, when I thought to myself, I had a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. I also had a child when I was 19. And so I'd always been a working mother. And I was looking after their shared service centre in Leeds, which meant I was away 3 nights a week. And I just felt I don't want to miss out again. So I set up my own business, which is brave in itself. But my ex-husband, didn't work. So I needed to bring the money in. So I couldn't just have this sort of lifestyle business on the side, fluffy pink HR. I had to make it work. But I do understand how to make money. And it was reasonably successful from the get-go. The model changed, the business model changed. When I first started out, it was just me, charge out rate. But I had some good relationships and I understood sales and business development, and that really helped me, and developing partnerships and things. But it was when, a year after I'd started out, when I was very unexpectedly diagnosed with cancer. And at that time, I don't know why, I went into panic mode. It didn't occur to me I could have taken a mortgage payment holiday or anything like that. I just felt like I had to work enough every month to bring enough money in to pay the mortgage and everything, which is what I did. I didn't have a lot of energy going through chemo and radiotherapy. So I brought an associate in. So I could still do some of the work, but I was working through someone else. And then when I'd sort of recovered, took a little while, then I brought a few more in, and that's my model now. I work with a team of people flexibly, but I kind of pivoted a bit, I think, but it was quite a tough time.
I bet it was. And so you did that in reaction. I mean, again, you just sort of drop that in you have young children, you're the primary breadwinner, and then you get a cancer diagnosis. So you used that as an opportunity to essentially build a business, to scale it yourself rather than do it all yourself, which probably is a really good decision. But I guess, do you think you wouldn't have done that otherwise, or would it have taken you longer to get that point?
It would take me longer to get to that point. I think when I first started out, bearing in mind that I'd been running a big team, I probably had 60 people that reported into me. I had 5 direct reports. I had a finance lead, a marketing lead, an IT lead, and then suddenly it was just me and my laptop. It did feel a bit lonely. It felt a bit lonely. And it was really weird to think everything I did, I had to do myself. It was a bit like back to the floor. But equally, it was very positive in terms of understanding what I did and didn't want to do. And I remember at the time thinking, I won't do recruitment, I won't do training. And someone said to me, very wise, the market will dictate what you do, which is exactly what happened, because you've got to make money. But I think it accelerated the process in a way. It could have knocked me from a psychological point of view, but I felt like a bit like a phoenix arising from the ashes. And I'd had a similar experience maybe 6 years before. My daughter was 2 months old and I got septicemia. So I'm the only person that I know that's ever breastfed in intensive care. Quite an interesting experience. So I'm kind of like, I rely on myself to be resilient. And so I thought, another challenge, how am I going to face it? And I also got a bit more organised as well, I think. When you bring other people into your business, you have to work in a way that they can understand. And that's almost 15 years ago now. So yeah.
I mean, part of the follow-up questions in here, you're already answering as we're going along. So I'll just like chuck in our little agenda for here is your career journey, key successes, key challenges. And so I think we just talked about more than one already in terms of the challenges. I hear that you are resilient. I mean, that's an understatement. Would you say, because lots of people, I've also had lots of people on the podcast who have burnout or whatever. What do you think your secret is for, or what's your positive strategy for being resilient and dealing with these challenges in the way that you have, and still smiling and making it through?
That's a great question. I mean, I did have burnout when I was 30, actually, when I was doing my professional exams. So I had experienced that of doing too much. And so I think that's quite a positive thing again, because you think, okay, so I do have to rest sometimes and exercise. And I think we all understand the things that we need to do to keep ourselves calm. Or sort of in a sort of healthy sort of state. For me, it's about getting outside, being in nature, not drinking too much, doing exercise, and that's a challenge when you work for yourself, because and particularly run your own business, because you never get to go on holiday. The only time you can truly relax is the public holidays, and even then you might get an airport.
Yeah, therefore, absolutely.
But you take the rough with the smooth, and these days that's not such a big problem. But I think it's I think it's mind over matter. I generally do. I think things happen to us in life. People die, they leave us, we get hurt. We know that we will overcome them, and it's not being sort of crushed by it, taking some time out and then sort of thinking of the way forward. I think I'm quite an energetic person, and I'm only sort of sad or down for a certain period of time. I'm always thinking about the next thing and the next thing. Even now at my advanced age, I am.
And well, when you say we know that we'll overcome them, I think that's quite an interesting mindset or belief, that if other people don't think that, then that's a good mindset to choose. I am going to overcome this, or I will overcome this, I've done it before, kind of thing. That's because I think when people get stuck, they don't have that mindset.
You're right. I think when I was going through my cancer treatment, one of my HR colleagues, and HR colleagues are wonderful to have, all of us, because they're so positive. She had worked for the NHS, and senior HR colleagues in the NHS, they take them out into a clinical environment. And she said they were talking to a radiotherapy department, and the guy that ran that said, show me 3 patients with exactly the same diagnosis, and I'll tell you who's going to recover quickly based on their mindset. If they're like, oh my God, I'm going to die and all of that, they're not going to do as well. So it really is mind over matter. And I really took something from that, which is actually it is a state of mind. It's a positive mindset, isn't it? And it's how can I turn this challenge or this negative thing into an opportunity?
Absolutely.
Maybe, even if it's just understanding other people better, however you can make it positive.
And the other thing that strikes me, which I guess moving on to where you are now and why it's, to be able to be in a fractional CPA role where you can go and add value, you can jump in and out of different organisations. You think about people feeling confident enough to be a CPO in one organisation, you're doing that in multiple organisations. And I think it is interesting that you've got your sales under you. So you've got the commercial acumen, you sales, which is winning people over, communicating, blagging it to a certain degree, if in doubt, blag it, that sort of thing. Interesting, the audit thing. I mean, so that attention to detail for long enough, I can't imagine you would choose to do that indefinitely.
I'm better to manage other people doing it, but we helped Mazars, who won the CIPD internal audit, because we were on the team. There's not many HR professionals I discovered that are trained internal auditors, and it's actually quite an interesting thing. I'm not particularly a detail person, but the concepts of it does help you build really sort of robust strategy. And through doing that internal audit work, it gives us an opportunity to work on some massive clients that I can't name because they're not our clients. But so I get that constant experience, not just of little businesses that we're supporting, maybe up to 250 staff, but much bigger, organizations that are being audited. So it gives you just that bird's eye view the whole time. And I think the confidence thing, I think for me, it was always about, as a CPO, I felt like anyone I was working with, the chief executive or any of that team, were my equals. And I absolutely do feel that, because I know I run my own business. I know about profit and loss. I have some of the same issues, perhaps on a smaller scale, but I do understand it. And I think that really helps form a trusting relationship where, I'm not the expertise in that business, but I do understand some of the pressures. And particularly if I'm working with a CEO, it can be quite a lonely place. I think when we first started out, we had a service called the CEO Whisperer. That was where I would work with someone that had their own HR team, but they wanted a second opinion. We don't do that so much now, but occasionally we do it. But the thing I picked up there was, they absolutely do need that independent voice, which you get internally, but that's a bit weird because that person reports to you and is on your payroll. So how objective are they? So that's the interesting angle on it.
So you have the confidence, you partner with the senior team, and of course then from the confidence, I guess, breeds further confidence in terms of this. And there's the whole thing about the sort of strategic thinking. Have you any tips in terms of that, or have you always felt you were quite naturally good at that, or did you develop that further?
Interesting question. I would definitely say I can remember when I was doing my IPM exams many years ago, and I didn't really understand what strategy was until someone explained to me it's just a master plan. It's where are you and where do you want to get to? So where is your organisation now? Where do you want to be in 3 years or 5 years? What would you need to do now from an HR point of view to get to that point? So the big one, the HR people, we do quite a lot of auditing around this, is workforce planning. That's a really big part of HR strategy. But, so if you want to have, 50 graduates in 3 years' time, what relationships you nurture with universities now, or how you're making that sort of possible. And so I didn't actually understand it, but when I did understand it, it became really logical to me. And I think the real skill for any HR professional is being able to have that big vision, but then distill it down and make it into an operational plan and make it into something that changes things for people in that organization. I always remember going for an interview when I left Mazars, sadly, and was headhunted to go and work for this investment bank. And it was a ridiculous 5-stage recruitment process. And I had to have this final rubber stamp interview of the chair, or the CEO wanted to interview me. And he was ex-British Telecom. And he said, the thing is, it's, at our level, it's whatever you do, how is that going to make a difference to the people on the ground in their vans going out and fixing telephones? Can you translate what you're going to do, your performance management system or your reward system, so that it means something? And if you pass it down each line, will it mean something? So it was a really interesting conversation. And then I had to go back and see my boss and find out if I'd passed. And he said, there's good news and bad news. The good news is you've passed. The bad news is he thinks I'm not paying you enough. I got paid when I started.
Oh, well done. But that's a really good explanation about the strategy. It's not that rocket science, is it? It is actually just a master plan, but also the secret is being able to make it applicable and relevant, and people see the purpose of it, chunk it up and down.
Yeah, I think that HR professionals, the aspiring ones, want to be CPOs. I think HR can go down an employee relations tunnel and get too caught up in the managing some of those cases. And it's thinking about, I always think in HR, people are worried about what's going to go wrong, but actually it's thinking about what you can do to make things go right, looking at it the other way. And that's not always easy, because sometimes the CEO are just focusing you on that. So that's the sort of tussle you have to have every day. And you're influencing upwards from quite an early start, I would say.
The interesting thing about that is, you get more of what you look for type thing. So if you are focusing on looking up and creating things that will make things go right, and you carry on doing that, then hopefully that should mean that fewer things go wrong. So you don't, it's almost, whereas if you focus on all the things that go wrong, then you can find more and more and more, and you end up with your 400 capability issues. So there's something there about fulfilling.
And HR personnel people are focusing all their resource on the people that there are problems with, as opposed to the people that are bringing money in and growing.
Yeah. I mean, that's a classic. That is also a classic with managing underperformance, isn't it? You're spending all your time on that area, as opposed to the people who are performing, that you want to retain, you want to get rid of.
I rarely think capability works. I think it's already on the back foot. I think it's not a helpful process to follow, to be honest.
So we were going in a bit into successes. So we've talked a bit about some challenges you overcome. If you look back on all these things, are there any particular successes that stand out to you? I mean, so it sounds like there's been lots of successes, but anything that would be good to share or learn?
Gosh, I So I think I'm proud of being able to go from different types of industries. So going from, the private sector to the public sector, that was quite a big leap. And then working for myself, I think that was massive. There's no real guidance, and we haven't mentioned it, but I did co-found HR Independence with someone I work with that I'm not part of anymore. But that was partly because I recognised as a senior HR professional, the CIPD just didn't do independent people. It was like, come back when you've got a job. It's not like that now because there's been some influence. But I did have that sort of view, which was lots of people are going to be working independently. It suits people. And also it's really important for our economy to grow, to get that HR support. We need it. How can we support it? And HR Independence is all about helping people set up a business in a professional way and looking at everything from finance to governance to the right systems to the right registrations. And the CIPD don't do that because they see our businesses as commercial businesses, but actually we're just HR professionals working in a different way. And, with the HR banner on. So that is something that I am proud of, even though I'm not involved anymore because I'm focusing on my own business. I definitely see that as a success. The biggest thing there is that I definitely think, and the CRPD would agree with this, they now think about and have included HR independence or independent HR professionals, and that's a really positive thing.
It really is a positive thing, yes. And I mean, we had you on the podcast way back, I think, when you were launching that, and it's going back a bit, and you did some examples. And of your CIPD, like I was going to ask you in terms of that, you were also were you the most influential? You've been named the most influential HR professional.
Yeah,
more than once, haven't you?
More than once, I have. And then I went through a divorce and focused on my business and stopped posting so much online. I might do it again because with anything like that, if you're out there, people know about you. But I definitely did a couple of years win that, which is great. One of the most influential people in HR. And have you ever looked at yourself on AI? I do come up. So but I have sort of stopped maybe doing some of that external focus on LinkedIn because I've been focusing on growing my business and falling in love, getting married, all that sort of thing. But
other successes, right? And success isn't just professional.
Other successes get. So and I think for me as a senior HR professional, I feel like I have an obligation and a duty to speak out about things that affect the HR profession. And I would happily contact the CIPD, for example, if I felt that there was something that needed to be addressed. Certainly there was during COVID where they weren't really supporting the independent people. They were just supporting big businesses. And we all needed support as well. So,
you're actually touching more businesses as an independent, aren't you? Because there's more smaller businesses that have got less sort of support systems.
Exactly.
It's really important.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, fascinating whistle stop tour. I think with a number of things. I mean, we've had conversations before, and I've forgotten that, Ruth. But in terms of, there's only so much we can cover here, and within half an hour. If you were to look back at your teenage self, and give yourself top tips now, what would you look back and say?
Well, I actually did prepare this. I came up with 3 things. Don't worry. Because if we all think to ourselves, everything we've ever worried about has never actually happened. So don't waste any time on that. Don't think you have to be an expert in everything. I just think HR people sometimes get sucked into giving opinions on things that aren't their area.
Yeah.
The final one, which I think is the key, is know what you're really good at and try and have a job where you do it a lot.
Brilliant.
Whatever that might be. Those are my top 3.
So don't worry. I've got to do what you're really good at. What was the middle one again?
Don't think you've got to be an expert in everything.
Don't think you've got to be expert in everything. I love that. Yes, it's fine to say I don't know, or I'll look it up, or ask ChatGPT.
Exactly. But I think HR people naturally want to be helpful. And I do see it independent. I should see it in-house where they've got involved in something that's just not their core area. Stick to your core, but then work out what you're really exceptional at, really good at, and try and do that a lot, because that's going to help you, for all people listening in, accelerate your career. Put yourself in the right situation where you can flourish and thrive. It might not be your current job, it might be a different job, but what are you really good at? Go and work in an environment where you'll be doing that a lot, and off you go.
Probably enjoy it as well. So that's synergistic, isn't it? You enjoy things you're good at usually, and therefore you kind of do more of it and do it better. So great advice. I love that. Ruth, thank you so much for coming on the HR Uprising podcast. It was absolutely a delight to have you on again. And I know I'll put your LinkedIn. I'm sure you're happy to connect on LinkedIn with everybody because you're always you're back communicating out there. Not as much as you used to, but you're definitely active out there, aren't you? So great.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now, you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.